Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football, along with our producer and engineer, Logan Landers, Vincent Turner, who's back with us today. And Vincent, we are blessed to have part two. This is the first time we've had a second appearance of a guest. We couldn't get it all in. I think Jackie's going to say, what the heck has got wrong with you guys? You get an hour with me, and you still didn't even get to the nitty gritty. But Vincent, we have Jackie Sherrill with us. Part two is what we'll call it. And obviously, we didn't get everything taken care of last week, but what a pleasure it is to have him on again.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and Vincent, here we go. Go ahead, Vincent. Yeah.
It's an honor. It's a pleasure. And as I said last week, the lights are bright. There's magic in the air. George Brinson. We on Broadway today with Coach Sherrill.
Well, we're gonna have to think of some Barry White lines to go with it as well. Maybe Jackie, you can help us out with that. First and foremost, thank you for agreeing to be back on with us. We should have done a better job of getting to the point, but there were so many great things that we learned about you, your time at Alabama with Coach Bear Bryant, some of your teammates early on in your coaching history and how things changed for you. We pretty much left off where you were at Washington State. And if you don't mind, I'd like to begin by asking you a little bit about what I can't teach what I don't know, Jackie. And you had Bear Bryant, you had yes, you had so many different influences, even some of the assistant coaches that you had, whether it be in the high school or the college experience. And then when you get the job at Washington State, is there a certain part of that where you caught yourself going, I can't believe I'm quoting Bear Bryant to these 17, 18-year-old kids right now, but that's what I know, and I know it works, and it's going to work for me. Was there any portion of that went into your head coaching experience?
Well, I think it followed me when we were at Arkansas and Coach Majors got the job at Iowa State. When I went to Iowa State, we had to completely rebuild a program. And so having the opportunity to be part of that. And then in 73, when we went to Pittsburgh, the same thing. Then you also had to understand in recruiting that Washington State was not Southern Cal, UCLA, or even Washington. So you had to evaluate better and recruit harder. And I was fortunate when we went to Washington State. I hired offense, defensive coordinator, but also some young coaches that had been on the staff at Pittsburgh, and some that I had known through the coaching ranks. But, Washington State's a long ways to go from, when you're talking about Pittsburgh or you're talking about Arkansas, it's a long ways to go. So I was fortunate to be able to hire. Then I wanted some coaches on the West Coast. I've always felt when you took a job, especially a high school job, from a coaching job in the state, you wanted to hire some high school coaches that actually knew the students, the players, the state, and also had a great reputation in coaching in the state, and I was able to do that. Bob Leahy was my offensive coordinator, and Howard Tippett was my defensive coordinator. And then that is how I got started coaching kickers, punters, snappers, and holders. In the first meeting, I asked we had an All-American punter, great punter, and I asked who could coach the kicking game, or the punters, kickers, snappers, and holders. And Howard finally raised his hand and he said, I will. And I looked at Howard and I said, Howard, I will, because I'm not going to mess him up. So that's how I got into coaching the kickers and punters, snappers, and holders. And I'm not saying that during my career I was the best, but I didn't know anybody that knew, as a head coach, that knew it as much as I did coaching those players.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, Jackie. And then today, there are coaching staffs that have 15, 20, 30 people just on the offensive side. You had a total of about 8, maybe 9, including yourself, for most of those staffs, right? It was a much smaller group. And so I would imagine that your decision-making of having the guy that can recruit locally, the guy that wants to travel and go get kids there, the guy who has the ability to close the deal and make the sell and sell the school and the program, the guy that is going to be up 18 hours a day, the one that's going to help organize all of that. There's such a just recruiting facet, not just being a great football coach and teaching techniques and how to make players better, but to be able to hire all of that in 1 or 2 guys. What a tough decision that has to be.
Well, I hired a young coach from UCLA, and the reason I hired him was because being on the staff, he knew UCLA and Southern Cal's recruiting, and we went after. We had the list, he did, and we went after all the players that they had recruited or were recruiting from 30 on, because back then you could sign 30 players. And then hiring a high school coach in the state of Washington, but also hiring a coach that understood the junior college players, the system, and how to recruit, because Washington State at that time, you had to recruit junior colleges. And we were very fortunate at Pittsburgh, and I had a lot of luck recruiting players out of California, Utah, in junior colleges. So we were investing in junior college players as well as high school players.
Well, speaking of Pittsburgh, let's go there. No offense against Washington State, but because you had been there earlier and you helped bring in some players that were growing into juniors and seniors by the time that you get the head coaching job there. So you have that going for you. I'm sure they were great hosts in terms of bringing in the 17 and 18-year-old kids, because they recognized you from the staff. And then, my goodness, what a great group of guys that you were able to bring in. No wonder you fought for the national championship as early as you did. But then again, you've also got really good coaches that are around you that help do all the dirty work that has to get done to make sure that they like the campus, their parents, their moms and dads all have a place to go and feel like they're a part of the program. The massaging of all of that, absolutely amazing in the way it happened and how it turned out for you, especially as quickly as it did from you taking over that program back in 73. Well, actually it was 77 by the time that you returned as the head coach.
Well, I was very fortunate because the timing in hiring staff, even today has to go correct. But I was fortunate to be able to hire Jimmy Johnson. And the reason I was able to hire Jimmy is he was on the staff at Arkansas, but they made a change. Instead of hiring Jimmy as the head coach, they hired Lou Holtz. So Jimmy, naturally, I don't know if he was asked to stay. I'm sure he was, but he felt, not good.
Sure.
Because they passed him over for the head job. And I was fortunate to get Jimmy. We had a great staff at that time at Pittsburgh, and Wanstead was the GA. Wanstead actually played, for Pitt, offensive lineman, and then he started as a GA at Pittsburgh. We had Tony Wise as a GA. We had quite a few players that were GAs from other places. Kurt Ferentz was a GA at Pittsburgh. So we were fortunate to hire some great young coaches, but also they were mixed with coaches like Jimmy Johnson and others that were able to teach them what coaching is all about. So, there's two things as a staff. You have to have the players, no question, but you also have to have the assistant coaches.
Yeah, and you had Foge, for example, that's a lockdown for you. I mean, I'm not saying he would go with you anywhere, but he's one of those guys that I know he's going to be in my hip pocket, and he's going to make me a better coach because he's going to push me beyond limits. But he's great with the kids. He's able to bring in the new guys. He knows a lot about the game. And having that, and then Jimmy, as you said, who felt slighted at Arkansas, guess what? I'll take you, Jimmy. Let's develop you, and you are going to be a head coach very soon. I'm going to borrow you here at Pitt for a while, and let's make the best of was, we're going to make lemonade out of lemons, right?
Well, there's no question, Jimmy handled the defense, and our relationship was that you respected as a head coach, you hire people, coaches to coach. And as a head coach, you're responsible for all the organization. I did the practice schedule, but I let the coaches coach. And if you follow Jimmy's career all the way to the Cowboys, he hired coaches and let them coach. That doesn't mean that he didn't know and didn't plan the practices, but he was very great as a head coach, helping the assistant coaches become head coaches. And he had quite a few head coaches that he put out in himself.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, his coaching tree, yours, obviously. And Logan had a picture just a moment ago, and I'm guessing this is game day because I don't think that Jackie Sherrill is going to wear a tie. There had to be a coat nearby, right? Not on game day. But another thing about you that I remember, now it happened later, but there were times where you weren't wearing a headset. And there's a lot of coaches back from that era because you trusted what your assistants were doing. You'd ask around, hey, what are we going to run on this? Hey, we should run a blitz here, or let's go deep every now and then. And coach, what are we going to do on fourth down? Do you want to kick it or go for the field goal? That other than that, you're involved with everything else, but you didn't need a headset. Today, you would never see a coach without one.
Well, today, a lot of them are offensive, defensive coordinators or try to be. I don't know where you have time as a head coach to be an offensive or defensive coordinator because your time is split. Your job is to organize and to make sure everything is flowing. That doesn't mean you don't make the calls, certainly the critical calls. That doesn't mean that you don't make the call to go for two or go for one or punt or kick, field goal, there's a lot of decisions that the head coach. So that means you need to be involved in everything. And
Yep.
Today, when we see a coach that is the offensive coordinator, does that mean he doesn't spend any time defensively? So during the game, you need to make those decisions. Sometimes what you need to do defensively are in the kicking game. So to me, it's better for a head coach to be involved in everything and understand and plan and organize than it is just to be strictly involved. And that came probably from being around Coach Bryant, being around Coach the Majors, being around the great coaches. I don't know if you go all the way back to Duffy Daugherty, or you go back to a lot of the great ones. I don't know how many of them, including Coach Bryant, that actually coached defense or actually coached offense. Coach Darrell Roll, same thing. Same thing with Coach Switzer. I think that even though Barry knew the offense as well as he did, he allowed coaches to coach.
Yeah, that's interesting. My philosophy has always been of the understanding when I first learned how this works is the head coach, he coaches the coaches, right? Because he's got to spend time in the college world. You've got the media, you've got alumni, you've got the visitation with the president every now and then or the chancellor of the school. You've got so many other responsibilities that can take away from the time where you're watching film. So you entrust that to the other guys. Now, out on the practice field, you got to work with the kickers and the punters, long snappers. Thank goodness, I'd probably be a better long snapper if I had been under you. So I will make a bow to that. But someone's got to work with them, and you do that. Nick Saban works with the defensive backs when he's at Alabama. That's part of it, right?
Yes, but how many coaches actually coached you how to snap?
I can count it on zero fingers. Zero.
Yeah.
They try to correct it when I made a mistake, which was all the time. But that was one of those little areas.
They didn't know how to grip or turn or where to put your hands. They just snapped it. Well, that's a good one. Come on, dummy, do better. So
Yeah.
I
Don't snap
always,
it over his head, okay? If you want to be out of here, just do that one more time, and
yeah,
we'll make that correction.
yeah. Well, I
Well,
always made plans. I never let the kickers, snapper, or holders or punters sit around and practice. And you go to practice today and you see all of them over there doing nothing during practice. I never allowed that to happen. They practiced every minute that they were on the practice field doing something. So they had a schedule, and I worked with them pre-practice for 30 minutes, and then during some of the practice periods, I actually worked with each individual group. So, they had a schedule, and just like offensive line, defensive line, they had to go through a whole 60 minutes of practice.
would you say Frank Bremer was one of the first that was really credited with being a guy because they blocked so many kicks and they were so good at the return game? Do you think that your extra time in dealing with the kickers, the punters, and just working on that just a little bit more made a difference for you, especially when you took there are three phases to the game. You're going to work on offense, defense, but not many people spend the amount of time on the special teams. Was that an advantageous time period for you during your practices?
Very much so. Most people, when you think about blocking punts or going full speed, most of the college teams never go full speed against each other. They'll go through all the kicking maybe on Thursday or Friday, and they're in shells or in full sweats. The kicking game, the first part of practice always went uh, good against good in certain phases, whether it's extra point block or extra point protection. Same thing with punt protection every day, because that is just when we look at the game. Today there's approximately 80 plays. You can overcome 3 or 4 or 5 plays offensively, or 3 or 4 plays defensively, but you may not overcome that one play in special teams to
Yeah.
win the game.
The math is amazing. If you block a kick, your chances of winning go up exponentially. Or if you have a kick blocked against you or a big return for a touchdown, exponentially, it reduces your chances of winning. And hopefully they get that all figured out. But going full speed in the special teams portion, now you're going to get a lot of your starters that are not going to like that, and they probably will have some kickback. But the value on game day, it exceeds all expectations and really helps you to win maybe 1 or 2 games a year because of it. Is that a close estimation there for you?
Yes. I mean, if you went full speed, I'm going all the way back to Coach Bryant. Practice has to be harder than the games. And, when I go around and help coaches or talk to coaches, especially in the kicking game, and I watch how they practice, there's a reason they're not very good, because, let's just take punt return. Most of the teams out there just walk through punt returns. Punt return is a fast twitch play. In other words, it's a full speed sprint. And that's, in either that you're trying to block somebody or you're trying to get the leverage. And I made sure whenever we worked on punt returns, that it was a full speed drill, because that's what's going to happen in the game.
Yeah, I personally think that part of the reason that what you're describing is so important is because how many plays do you get where there's a block in the back and a nice return is nullified because one guy wasn't used to going full speed and he hits the guy, instead of hitting him in the shoulder in the front, he gets him in behind, and you take away a 30-yard gain or even something bigger on some occasions. Hey, we've talked a little bit about your coaching experience there, and I appreciate your time with that. I know Vincent has some names that he wants to bring up to you. That first recruiting class when you get to Pitt and subsequent names that are brought up, What did you do? My goodness, you had such a great compilation of talent that you were able to bring in along with the coaches, right? You mentioned Dave, you mentioned Jimmy, I mentioned Foge. I mean, you got a great group of guys, but man, what was in the water for you guys to be able to put some of those guys together?
Well, when I went to Pitt, there was no recruiting files. So all that was gone because the coaches took them with them, the files. So you were actually, and I would have our coaches and me personally, I'd be up there till 12 o'clock at night calling a player. But when I called a player that I thought possibly would be a recruit, if he was not recruited by Notre Dame, Ohio State, Penn State, then I moved on to the next player. And the same thing with the kids from the South. If they were not recruited if they were from Florida, Florida State, Miami, then I moved on to the next kid. And it was just fortunate that we were able to find enough kids, but the coaches that we had were excellent recruiters, not only on the field coaching, but they were great recruiters as well.
And go ahead, Jackie, please.
And it kind of helped that you were the defending national champion. And they had got to see a young man by the name of Tony Dorsett run pretty well. So when you went to see a high school and you said, I'm from Pittsburgh, then the door was open.
And I would imagine your expectations changed. The guy would just answer the phone. Hey, I'll take it, Washington State. You answered the phone, where it had to be a lot harder. You had to be we're not going to get the guy that nobody else wants. We want the guys that everybody's fighting for, and I'm going to want to fight for them too. Is there a fairness in that evaluation too?
Well, yes, but also I've always recruited and told the coaches, find the player that is a great player or going to be a great player that not necessarily is a 5-star. Ricky Jackson wasn't a 5-star. Ricky Jackson actually was recruited in basketball more than he was, higher than he was in football.
Really? Wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
So go find the players that could play. And, Russ Grimm, for example, not a lot of people would recruit Russ Grimm because he played quarterback, linebacker, and a punter in high school.
Wow.
And when you recruited him, you were going to recruit him not as a quarterback, you're going to recruit him as a linebacker. But again, he had some offers, but by the time when we moved him to offensive line at center, he became a great, great player. So just because you recruit a player, you want to find players that can play, then find a position to play. And that came all the way back from my day at playing for Coach Bryant. Coach Bryant would find you a place to play if you could play.
Hey, remind everyone real quick about that knock on the door, and he was there. He never went to the door, but he asked you about a certain position that you were going to try, right?
Yeah, but like he told Joe, what do you mean trying? You either can do it or you can't.
I think I'm ready, right? Isn't that what Joe said? I think I'm ready. You think?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
And Joe remembers that because in the same thing when he came in and asked if I could play tight end, and I said, yes, sir, I'll try. And he said, I know you'll try. I want to know if you can play the damn thing or not.
Oh, it's funny every time I hear him because he always had an answer to that. All right, now you mentioned some of the names. You mentioned Russ Grimm and you brought up Ricky Jackson. Vincent, I know you got a ton of other names that you want to bring up.
Coach Sherrill, I'm gonna say this. On our show, 100 Yards of Football, we talk about all these great coaches in the past, from Coach Bryant to Coach McKay. But when I was doing my research on you, I would say this, and then honestly from the bottom of my heart, and to our fans out there, 100 Yards of Football, Coach Sherrill is royalty. Just look at his 77 recruiting class. And I hope everybody understand what I'm saying. The names here are Hall of Fame players. The names here are players that played at a high level. As you say, Ricky Jackson from Florida, Randy McMillan, who played in the league, Russ Grimm, a Hall of Famer, Lynn Thomas, a Super Bowl champion, Carlton Williamson, that's from the ATL, Atlanta, Georgia, the great intelligent guy, Mark May. It's just unbelievable. And of course, the young man from the state where my parents from, the great state of Mississippi, Hugh Green from Natchez. And I still don't understand how he got out of the state of Mississippi. But today, here on 100 Yards of Football, Coach Sherrill, we want you to talk about that recruiting class of 77, one of the best ever in the history of college football. And you definitely deserve your flowers. Speak on that right now, sir.
Well, we didn't know any better. You just went 24/7 trying to recruit because you had to put a class together. But recruiting Hugh, we found Hugh on film because we were recruiting a little running back out of Pascagoula, and that's where the defensive back came from as well. But we saw Hugh on film, and then we started recruiting Hugh Green, and Lynn Thomas, as you mentioned, but they all came, and Rooster Jones was the running back, but they all came to Pitt for a visit, and we were very fortunate to recruit. And then what they saw at Pitt, and the class, I will say this, when you bring players on campus, you're not around them 24/7. The players that are on that campus that are players or former players that are seniors, they are actually recruiting those players.
Yep.
And they did a better job of recruiting the players than the players at other schools, probably. And we were very fortunate. But, when you look at going into Mississippi and we took 4 players, but they all were starters. Then you're talking about Carlton Williams out of Atlanta, Georgia, great player. And I remember sitting at his home. The only question his mother asked me is, how far is the church from? And I told her, I said, ma'am, there's a church on campus, because we had a church right there next to the cathedral. And so it was important to a lot of things. Same thing with Hugh Green's, he lived with his aunt. His aunt raised him. And when he was there, the first night he called home and he told his mother, which basically was his aunt, told his mother, I've never seen black snow before. Well, in Pittsburgh, when it snowed, they would put the coal out as we in the South put salt out. And so it kind of laughed, but evidently that the snow helped get Hugh Green.
How about that? Having the kids that are there, the young men that are playing, sell the program, obviously a key component, as you mentioned. Can I ask, how did the Steelers help you? Because I can't imagine how the vibe in that city in the early 70s, 72, 73, with Franco's Italian Army and Gorilla's Gorillas, and it was a first for everything, and the Immaculate Reception. You were there for the 73 to 75 as an assistant, but then I think, what a wave of football. Could there be a Mecca? Could there be anything better? I know you were in Tuscaloosa at the time, but to have a pro team and a college team right next to each other that excelled the way that they did. Tell me a little bit about what the Steeler relationship was like for you.
Well, it certainly helped because a lot of the Steelers would come and use the weight room. And we had a young weight coach that now is the Cardinals weight coach, great young man. And they would come and work out at our facility at Pitt Stadium in the off season.
Wow.
So
Okay.
there were a lot of interaction between the players and our players and the pro players. Today, the Pitt locker room, talking about the practice facility, is in the same building as the Steelers. They have one half of the building. The Steelers have the other half. They both have practice fields. There's, I think, 3 practice fields. The Steelers have one, and Pitt has the other, or they share the third one. And then there's an indoor facility that they both share. So, and they play in the same stadium, although I feel like a lot of others that, and this happened at Memphis, when Memphis built the stadium on campus, how much it helped. And the same thing in Birmingham, when UAB built a stadium on, well, it's close by the campus, how much it helped UAB. So there's a lot of things that go into it to making a very successful program. But back then, yes, baseball players were very involved with hockey players. At that time, you had the hockey, baseball, football, and we did not have a pro basketball team, but the football and baseball and hockey was a big deal in Pittsburgh.
Well, my high school teammate, he was a couple years younger than I'm, Jamie Dixon, who coached there at Pitt, valued so much the new facilities that they were building and all that. So even though there wasn't an NBA team, boy, you sure got treated like you were an NBA, or if you were a good player on the Panther program, at least from a basketball perspective. I have to laugh a little bit because I know there are some cases where the Steelers probably would rather practice at your facility because they didn't have a whole lot. Three Rivers, great stadium for watch a game, but it really wasn't built the way everything is today. So completely different back then. Bare bones, minimum stuff. It was there was not a whole lot of flash or sizzle with the way that I mean, if you look at their practice jerseys, you probably had better jerseys that you threw away at Pitt than what they were using.
Probably so. Although back we started using tearaway jerseys with Tony Dorsett, and Tony went through a lot of jerseys.
Yeah, him and Earl Campbell. I still remember Earl having probably 5 or 6 linebackers reaching out and grabbing. It's basically a brawny paper towel that you put on him, and you probably had 20 of them that were made so that every time he came off, he'd get a fresh jersey and could continue to play. Interesting strategy, though. It was available. It was part of the rules back then.
Oh, yes. And I think Tony and certainly Earl changed the rule pretty quick.
Yeah. Even at the pro level, a lot different. All right, so you get there in 77. You got this great recruiting class, but they're young. They're 18. They're not even shaving a couple of those guys. All right, you got to build a little bit of time. So what was it like for you in terms of going? You look around the room and you look at your assistant coaches. We're going to be pretty good, and we're going to be pretty good in just a short amount of time. We just got to bake this a little bit more. We add a little more salt and pepper, and next thing you know, what was the confidence builder for you to know that this is we're not only going to be competitive, but we're going to be at the highest level?
Well, when you started winning games, I mean, you can tell pretty quick once you get in competition. We all think off season we have a good team, but we don't know until we get into the actual competition. And being in competition, we saw very quickly. And you look at the play, Hugh Green and Ricky Jackson, and a lot of these guys, you knew that they were going to be great players. And we back then we went to Kent. In other words, our 2 days, as we know back then, our fall camp, we went off campus because we didn't have a lot of practice. Well, I didn't want to stay on campus because of all the people that were there, the nightlife and everything else. It'd be very distracting. And so we would go to camp and isolate ourselves for the 2 weeks of fall practice.
And that you get to know each other in a different way. You got to lean on each other. It's a little bit tougher, or it could be a little bit easier, but to get off campus and get away. Now, was that your idea to do that?
We started doing that when Coach Majors, we went off campus.
Okay, right.
And first we would go to Johnstown and go off campus. But when I came back, the biggest difference, we started going 3-a-days. And we'd do the morning practice, and then our noon practice, or the one in between, was basically strictly kicking game. So we'd have the morning practice, the kicking game, and then the afternoon practice or night practice.
But you mentioned a moment ago, Jackie, we started to realize that we were getting good during games. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Army was on your schedule just about every year. Boston College, as an independent, you didn't have the same conference alignment. But then there's the Backyard Brawl, and then there's Penn State and other big games like that. You started winning those games. Talk a little bit about the importance of you begin the season with a couple of non-conference type, lower level or opposite conference. You're going to play. I think you played Kansas one year, right? So you're playing Big 8 schools. You might play an SEC school or two. I'm going to change my question. You had a role in that, right? You had helped with the athletic director to pick some of these schools that you wanted to play in the next couple of years. Talk about that process for you.
Well, it was very important, sitting down with the chancellor and the athletic director, which were both outstanding. I said we could make it a very tough schedule, or we can play, and this is what I suggested, that you play 6 teams that you should beat. Then you play, at that time we had 11, and then you play 3 teams that, you can flip a coin, and then play 2 teams that you really don't know if you can or can't beat. But, the schedule, and you see this today, you see it in the SEC or other teams where they're going to play teams that they're going to beat, especially at the end of the season before their last home game or their last conference game or their last rival game. But you have them spread out during, and then you see most of them that have the first 2, maybe 3 games that are teams that they're going to beat, that are not conference games. So the schedule is one that really helps you develop. But we talk about schedules. To me, probably one of the best things that I did was I would break our schedule down into months, because you usually had 4 games a month, and you wanted to win the month, which means you got to win 3 games. And to the players, psychologically, you were dealing on that month, whether it's September or October or November, you were dealing with those teams in that month, and to have a winning month.
Yeah, very interesting you put that together. Darryl Talley, who used to play, he was from West Virginia, and he's a linebacker with the Bills. When he joined the Falcons, he broke it down like this. And he's not the first guy to do this, but he's the first guy that got me to go, wait a second, that not only makes sense, it's a great idea. 16 games, you broke it down into 4 equal 4-game parts. First, second, third, fourth quarter year. If you go 3-1, 3-1, 3-1, and then 3-1, you're going to win the division. You're going to get a week off, and you're going to get a home playoff game. That's the way that he broke it down. You're doing something very similar at a different level. We're going to win February. I'm sorry. You're going to win during the offseason. Everything goes with your conditioning and everything, but we got to win September. And then October and November, right? Is that one of the ways that you approached it from a coaching staff that trickles down into the players?
Yes. And it was, it's easy to understand. And it made a difference to the players, because you would have that on the blackboard and our whiteboard, whatever you used. And then the players themselves would understand it.
Yeah, you've got a goal national championship way up at the top, right? But if you're in we got to win the conference, or we win our division. We got to win our first game, right? There are all these little subsets of goals that you need to have. We need to score 6 touchdowns against these guys in order to be able to get to where we need to be. You set different goals every week, but your ultimate goal is to be undefeated and win a national championship, or at least to fight for it. Correct?
Yes, but if you, as you said earlier, if you won your months, then if you won September, October, November, then you're going to play in a great conference championship, or you're going to play in a great bowl game at the end of the year. But your goals certainly are to have a winning season. Your goal is to beat your rival, whoever that is. Your goal is to win the conference, and your goal is to hopefully play for the championship. So, there are a lot of goals that you have in football, baseball, the same thing. You look at professional baseball, they don't put on their goal sheet, go undefeated. They go on winning, same thing the NFL as you did, win the conference, go to the playoffs, and then your final goal is to win the championship if you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, getting West Virginia, is that a specific weekend in October that you had them? And then obviously Penn State, those are the ones that you pretty much, you've got to win those. And it must put a smile on your face when you start doing that with the consistency that you did, right?
Well, you always enjoy beating your rival, whether if you're in Arkansas back then, it was Texas. Beating Texas at Arkansas was probably the biggest game that they had. Same thing with Texas and A&M. And Texas actually had 3: Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M.
Yes.
But Arkansas Texas game was huge because both of them fought for the championship for many years.
Yeah, and with you, West Virginia being one, and Penn State, of course, you want to have state rights. I'm sure that certainly opened the recruiting process for you and made it a lot easier for some of those guys that Joe Paterno was trying to recruit.
Well, it changed, and certainly when you started recruiting those players and getting them, it made the rival a lot more intense, because then it was 365 instead of just during the season.
Yeah. You're constantly having to sell as a coach, aren't you? And especially now with the NIL and the portal and everything like that. But in a way, you're always recruiting for today. And I'm also recruiting for this game that I have, but I'm recruiting for 2 years, 3 years, sometimes in the future, because you never know who's going to be in the stands watching the game that may make the decision to go, you know what? I like the way that he did that.
Well, today, college football is more like pro football. You have analysts in pro football that do nothing but watch film, that do nothing but evaluate team players on other teams. So you same thing in college now. You're having analysts that are their only job is breaking the films down, getting a jump start or a head start on next week's opponent. But also you have a whole staff that is evaluating players on other teams, but also high school players, which are completely different. And so that's why you end up you have to credit Nick Saban. Nick was the first that brought pro football, I'm talking about the organization, to college football, because he was the first with the analysts. He was the first that had the large coaching staffs, and he was the first that actually had the analysts as part of his coaching staff with the players. Today, before, supposedly, the analyst was not able to coach a player on the field. Today, an analyst can coach. So you've got 30 plus people that are on the staff that are actually working in coaching and doing something for that team.
Yeah, it's amazing how it's grown and blossomed into a corporate atmosphere. We want to make sure that we talk about national championships and everything like that. Vincent, please go ahead.
Coach Sherrill, I want to ask you, after that great recruiting class in 77, the Pitt, I want to say machine got stronger. You was able to pick up Jim Cobart. And then the young man that everybody in the country wanted at the quarterback position, because I was a freshman at the time at the University of Arkansas. And all I used to hear about is Dan Marino, the arm, the explosion. But he didn't stay far from the Pitt campus, though, correct?
No, he grew up in Oakland, which Oakland is where Pitt is. And I probably could throw a rock from his house almost to the stadium. But he went to Central Catholic, which was right there as well. And, you know, he could have played baseball as well as he could have played football. He could have been a double sport player. And possibly could have been a Bo Jackson playing both sports because, you know, he had that ability. But throwing the football, I remember filming Danny as a freshman, his throwing motion. And I asked Danny, I said, Danny, who taught you how to throw the football? And he said, my dad. I said, well, what did he say? And he was very open. He said, my dad said two things: the ball goes up and out. And I said, well, he taught you well, because basically that's what it does. But I did tell him, I said, Danny, don't let anybody change your throwing motion. You're going to have a lot of people from this point on that are going to tell you your elbow's got to be here, and the grip's got to be here. I said, don't listen to any of them, and because no one can improve your throwing motion.
What about recruiting Jimbo?
Jimbo was a defensive player in high school, great athlete. And I remember when we moved him to offense, you know, at first he didn't like it, but he became, and the advantage we had great offensive line. That group was outstanding. All five went to pro ball. There's two in the Hall of Fame right now. There's probably going to be three, possible four. But, you know, they were really, really tight and still are. You know, Russ Grimm has a place outside of Pittsburgh in the hills, and they all, when they're in town, they all show up at Russ's place. But they had a great group of players, and they were tough down. They were, you know, kids from the Northeast that not only had size, but they were tough. And we were able to bring players in like Russ and Joe Moore, which was their coach, their offensive line coach, was unreal. You know, he's the only one that there's an award, assistant coach, that the award is named after him. But, you know, at Pitt, Notre Dame, his players he produced a lot of great players. And he wasn't easy on them. Very tough. As a matter of fact, the players, he would upset the players so much before a game that they wanted to hit him, but they knew better. They went hit somebody else. And, you know, but they all were excellent players. I remember one year, Danny got touched 11 times in the whole year. And that's not sacked. That was just touched.
Wow.
Wow.
And we had the advantage, their intelligence as players. Danny did everything at the line of scrimmage. He called we gave him the option to check off and call all the plays. And that's why he probably was so far advanced than the other players, other quarterbacks, when he went to Pro Bowl, because he had already been in that offense of being able to go to the line and check off and make sure he was protected.
I would imagine that Wally English, let's say, or Joe Daniels, um, yourself on occasions would just, we need to get out of this guy's way, or at least this machine that we have, as Vincent called it. Offensively, you got 5 linemen. If he doesn't get touched in a ball game, and that's happened, right? Dan Marino didn't get touched in against the guy in another jersey, didn't touch him while he had the ball. That's just amazing to me. But let's go deep. Let's not go deep. Let's just do a quick slant right here. Let's do some hitch routes. Let's run to the left or the right. This is going to work. And it wasn't flawless, Coach, but it was something that was kind of magical in that you had everybody on the field thinking and working together to make this happen in a way that was so far advanced for that time. That to me it just speaks volumes about the amount of talent and your willingness to tighten the leash or loosen it, depending on what you were able to see out there.
Well, there's 11 players, as you know that. And you watch all the games. They're either going to put, 4 on the line, and usually in pro ball, they're going to rush 4, or they're going to put 5 or 6, or bring the pressure. So the quarterback has to make the decision. So we're playing Maryland. They were playing an 8-man front. So when they put 6 on the line of scrimmage, we threw the ball. When they only would drop people off, we would run the ball. Same thing with people playing an odd man front. If they had 7 on the line of scrimmage, counting the strong safety or close by, we'd throw the ball. But we gave that opportunity to Danny to make that decision. And we would call a play, and we'd also have we'll call the formation and then say, check with me. So Danny had the opportunity to go to the line of scrimmage and call the play. And he was way ahead of most quarterbacks. There's a lot of quarterbacks I had in all-star games that I would have let the quarterbacks handle the checks at the line of scrimmage that they had never checked off before. They had no idea what I was talking about.
Yeah. Well, Brett Favre is noted on numerous occasions for saying, I had no idea what a nickel defense was. I had no idea how to call it. Someone needed to teach him and show him. He didn't learn that at the collegiate level. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do have one thing. What a great guy. I loved him as a player. He didn't get a whole heck of a lot, but another Pitt great is Matt Cavanaugh. Talk a little bit about your relationship with Matt.
Well, when Matt came in, he came in Youngstown, Ohio, played linebacker, quarterback in high school. Matter of fact, he did not play his freshman year, and I kept telling Coach Majors, let me have it. I'll play him at linebacker, and you can have him back next year. And he wouldn't let me do that. But
he wouldn't let you borrow him? You couldn't borrow Matt Cavanaugh for a season?
He wasn't going to let, because he probably felt if I had him, he would become a defensive player. But Matt was probably one of the toughest quarterbacks around.
Yeah.
And we opened up in 77 with Notre Dame. Matt gets tackled, falls on his wrist, his left wrist, breaks his wrist. And that he was operated on Sunday. Monday, he roomed with the center. On Monday, he was positioning his hands, trying to take a snap with a full cast on.
Wow.
And he did not play the next week. We played Boston College, but we put him in pregame warm-up where he was actually throwing the football. And so, Boston College thought that he was going to play and start. But two weeks later, he missed the next week. And the following week was 2 weeks we played Florida. And he actually started and played against Florida in Gainesville, Florida. But he was awful tough, great player, great leader.
Yeah, I just know that his love of the game and his willingness to keep his role. He had so many opportunities to play in the pro level, but there would be somebody else When I played with him in Philadelphia, it was Randall Cunningham. He goes to New York, it was Phil Simms or Jeff Hostetler. But he was a guy that understand his role and make sure that the guy who was in that role was as equipped as he possibly could be. Hey, watch for the blitz on this one. Hey, watch it. They're going to bring somebody on the weak side. Make sure you make that deep throw. Just a terrific human being and a great contributor to the game of football. I want to ask about the South Carolina game, your first national championship. You're at the Gator Bowl. You're playing the Gamecocks. When did you get that feeling that you go, this is not only going to happen, but they're going to start pouring Gatorade on me? You know what I mean? It just the greatness of being able to say this season we did everything that we possibly could, with the exception of that Florida State game. Everything else went according to plan.
I made a mistake at Florida State. We had so many kids from the South, and we're playing the night game as normal at Florida State, Tallahassee. And I told the players that you could have your families come and see you Saturday afternoon at the hotel. Now, I didn't know it was their first or second or third or fourth cousins. I didn't know it was their high school buddies. So, the distraction was overwhelming. And I don't know if I did a great job to prepare us to play early in the game. And so, I took that one. That was my fault, not theirs.
Well, a great team, too. I mean, they were ranked, number 10 or 11 in the country at that time?
Yeah. Well, they had the best punt block in the country at that time. Yeah. And they had one little player that's now coaching at Colorado. So they were the first offset where they would have 5, 6 rushing from one side. And no one else in the country did that before. So I spent the whole week. We had a freshman punter, and I spent the whole week in protection. I didn't spend any time covering. And we protected and we punted well, but we didn't cover very well because they did not cross the 50 offensively for almost the whole game, but one time. But every time we punted, they crossed the 50, and they kicked. I want to say they kicked either 4 or 5 field goals to win the game.
How about that? Well, now Dion, did he return anything against you, or did you? Big returns are enough, especially in Tallahassee, to get the crowd on their feet, even though the offense wasn't moving.
Well, he didn't return one for a touchdown, but it was on inside the 50 every time.
Okay, yeah. He's a man amongst boys, it appeared, not only against you, but everybody else that they played. He was just absolutely fantastic every time he touched the ball. Okay, so the national championship, and Georgia's saying, we got it, you've got it, doesn't matter. Congratulations on that. But how does that change you as an individual? And who wanted more money first? I mean, was it who said we need to get a pay raise around here?
Well, I don't know about that one, but the game against Georgia, when Pitt in 76 won against Georgia, Matt Cavanaugh was actually the MVP. So later, and this happened, we're playing Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and we had lost to Penn State, which that was mine. And ball was inside the 20 or the 20-yard line. We had less than 2 minutes. The ball moved down the field, and we had it third and 4, and was 4th and 3, excuse me. And I called Danny to the sideline, and I said, Danny, we can either kick the field goal, tie the game, and try to somehow get it back and win, or we can go for it. And he looked me dead in the eye, and he said, Coach, we ain't here to tie this blank game.
Yep.
And I said, okay. And that's when they rushed 8 people. We could only protect 7. And he knew that. And we actually, the play we called, where we were knew they'd play man probably, that we would cross the running backs, split backs, cross them and pick one of the linebackers and make the first down. Well, Danny read the blitz, and we had the tight end, all three, flanker, tight end, X, ran takeoffs. And John Brown made a move on the free safety. And Danny actually took 2 more steps for protection back than he normally would take. Instead of taking 5, he took 7. And through the touchdown strike, that's how we beat. So it wasn't the coach. The player called the play. The player, well, didn't call the play, but the player made the decision to go for it, and the player made the play.
Being in the position to make the right adjustment at the right time. And then Danny said that that's one of the greatest throws he's ever made in his life, right? That just a testament to the precision of doing it and practicing it the right way, and then getting in a big game, and they're going to bring more than we can block, and buying yourself a little extra time for obvious reasons. That produces national championships amongst a bunch of guys that are going to be playing on Sunday and eventually be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah. Well, players win, coaches don't. And I had, and as you guys understand, as players, coaches get a lot of credit, but it's the players that actually win the game. Our job is to make sure we prepare them mentally and physically, and put them in the right position.
Yeah, absolutely. Vincent?
Talk about the Sugar Bowl in 81, the 82 Sugar Bowl. One of the best throws I ever seen a quarterback make to John Brown with about a minute to go in the game. It was about a 48-yard strike. The ball comes out Dan Marino's hands like a cannon, and John Brown makes a tremendous catch in the end zone. Talk about that play. And the reason I said it, because my father, who's watching us today from Memphis, Tennessee, who's 88 years old, Chester Turner, jumped up from his seat drinking on that cognac when that play happened.
Well, it's one of those plays that when you draw it up, everything had to be perfection, because you had to make sure that you blocked, and the 2 running backs had to pick up the 2 inside linebackers, but you had 1 outside linebacker is going to be free, and because you moved the line one way or the other, and Danny knew that. So, and he also knew that you're playing man, and he had to choose which one he picked to get the ball to. And he chose Brown because Brown made the move on the free safety. And it's kind of a side story to that. Back then, and even today, when you go to a bowl game, championship, whatever, your head coaches are usually the last coaches to talk for the press conference, for the media. So it was Coach for Georgia, which was Vince Dooley. So Coach Dooley spoke, and I was speaking after Coach Dooley. So I asked him to get me a board that I could draw on. So I drew our offense set, Georgia's defense, and I went through their defense. And I said, you're probably going to ask why I did this. And I said, I know their defense, but also I've been watching them practice for the last 2 weeks. And I said that Coach Broyles, which was doing the game, he fell out of his chair laughing. And they had a young assistant coach from Georgia that was in there. He gets up, runs out, and tells Coach Dooley, I've been watching their practice for the last 2 weeks. But that wasn't true. I just did that to, get a laugh.
Were you? We hear stories, and Vincent mentioned both of these men earlier, or Bryant, John McKay. They were very good friends. There were some rivalries that you had, and it took a little while for you and Joe Paterno to become friends. But who are the guys that you that were head coaches elsewhere that you go, you know what? I don't care. I mean, I love the game. I'm going to win it and do whatever, but you're my buddy. And we'll get together afterwards. We'll have something to drink or, have a cigar or something like that. My family and your family will get together. Who were some of the guys that you really associated with?
Well, quite a few of them. Probably through the whole career, one of the ones that you spent time with that I did and was, well, there were quite a few, but Jimmy was one because Jimmy went off and became a head coach. But Coach Majors still had the relationship with Coach Majors, and Mark Rick. I mean, there's quite a few of them that you had a relationship. But what Nike did back then, Nike took all the coaches that won the bowl games or went to bowl games to the Nike trip. And all the head coaches, Barry Switzer, you go on and on, you all were there at the Nike trip. And they had all kinds of competitive games that you played against each other. But you also got to be around the coaches, play golf with them, and be there for almost 5 days. And so you would spend a lot of time enjoying being with coaches. Even the coaches, Paterno went all the time.
Yeah.
Paterno later in life or after, we were invited. My wife and I was invited to a game at Penn State. We went and had the recruiting dinner at Coach Paterno's house. But before I was in his office when I first got there, he had me talk to the team. And I told Joe, I said, Joe, I'm a tag along. And he looked at me and he said, what do you mean? I said, Joe, you didn't invite me. You invited my wife, and I'm a tag along. And he kind of laughed and he said, well, maybe that's true.
Oh, man. Well, on game day, you probably shake hands at midfield and you say, how's your team doing and all that, but you're so intense on winning. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be Joe Paterno or Bear Bryant. You want to win the game. And so there's a certain part of, I don't care who you are. My job is to step on your throat and not let go until the game is over. But then when you get to play golf with these guys or play darts or go bowling or do something like that, man, this could be one of my best friends ever if it wasn't for us being at opposite universities.
Well, there's no such thing as when your alumni, especially in college, is not going to allow you to be friends with your rival coach. And Alabama and Auburn were not friends. You can take Mississippi and Mississippi State, same thing.
Right.
So if you're in state like Penn State and Pitt, you're not going to see the head coach out socializing together.
Right.
And
it's
not going to happen. Mike Leach was probably one of the easiest guys to ever be around. And, Mike didn't care. He would, of course, he could talk for 4 hours and never answer your question.
Yeah.
The media liked him because he would go off on a tangent somewhere else, but he wouldn't ever answer the question.
Well, Woody and Bo, Woody wouldn't even buy gasoline, even if his car was out in the state of Michigan. So, yes, there are some rivalries between, I would imagine, Bear Bryant and the Tennessee folks. It's never going to happen. So I appreciate and I value that, obviously. But there's
a difference of respect and being a friend, and because the alumni are not going to allow you to be friends. And if you are, then there's something wrong with you.
Yeah. Well, privately, like I said, when John McKay and Bear Bryant, but you know what? They weren't rivals from the same conference, so they were allowed to have a weekend or a 2 or 3 day vacation that they would take during the summer, where they get together, they'd have a great time, have an adult beverage and a cigar, and go play cards or do something like that.
Here's a side note. 1973, the coaching convention was Washington, D.C. So I'm a young coach. I'll go to the convention, and I'm there with Coach Bryant. Coach Bryant invites me up to his hotel room. And at that time, he was going to step down in 1973.
Really?
And one of the coaches that he had to interview, or not interview, but to offer the job to, was Coach McKay. And he didn't take it. So the coaches that he had to take his place all turned him down. So that's when he decided to stay and turn the program back around. But in 1973, Coach Bryant was going to step aside.
Wow. Well, interesting enough, two years later in 75 mid-season, John McKay decides to leave to go to Tampa. And SC had the #1 team in the country at that time. They lose 4 games in a row and barely made it to a bowl game. So how quickly things change. And then let's talk about you, for example. You had 2 great years at Pitt there in 80-81, and next thing you know, you're in College Station. You're going to Texas A&M. You're going to become an Aggie.
Well, I'll be an Aggie, but the bottom line is I was going to be able to be the head coach and athletic director. And at that time, there wasn't any other than, I think, Coach Bryant was. He was the only AD head coach at the time.
So that opens up a whole new opportunity for you. The one thing that I got to ask, who came to you, or did you come up with this yourself to get the 12th man and to start that? What an amazing, great marketing move, and just such a cool thing for you to do for college football.
Well, being at A&M, they have certain traditions, but I used to pass the bonfire. The bonfire was a tradition where the students actually built the bonfire. They didn't have somebody outside. And they cut 5,000. The term was cut, and that was in early fall, August, September. They would cut 5,000 trees and bring the trees, after they cut all the limbs off, and stack them according to size. And they had some anywhere from 4 inches to actually 6 feet in size. And those were the dress locks, the big one. And so I would pass the bonfire going home at 11, 12, 1 o'clock at night. And finally I stopped. And so one young Redpot, that's the person in charge, started talking to me, and then he said, "Do you want me to teach you how to wire?" I said, "Sure." And what they do is they take every log is wired to 2 other logs, so you have three logs wired together, and then you just continue to do that to put them all together. But
Right.
They all were 10 feet tall, and they would go up to 6 stacks. But the logs on the 6 stack was not very big, but
Right.
the big logs were really big. And so he handed me a pair of pliers, taught me how to wire, and the pliers had been passed down, I think, for 3 generations. And then he asked me if I wanted to go up on the 4th stack. Now that's 40 feet high. Go up on I said, sure. So there was a crane. You had the cable down, then you had a chain that was your stirrup that you put your foot in, grab the cable, and they would put you up on the 4th stack. So he put his foot in, I put mine on top, grabbed the cable, And the crane operator took us up, kind of moved us around, and then he stops and gets out and goes and gets a Coke. So and you can see the stacks, but the bonfire. And so we're up on the fourth stack, and I'm wiring, having fun. And then all of a sudden, one of the young guys working said, "You want to go home?" And this is after about an hour and a half or so. And I said, "No." But by me being on the stack, fourth stack, it spread through campus, the core dorms, that, the dumb football coaches up there on the fourth stack. So when the guy said, "You want to go home?" the student, I said, "No." He said, "You want to," and a few minutes later, "You want to go home?" No. Finally, he said, "You're going home." What they had me do, I was going to slide down a go-home rope, was 2 inches rope, which they held it, and you'd slide down. And so now you're talking about 40 feet high sliding down a 2-inch rope. But the guy at the bottom was raising and dropping the rope. So now you're cutting your hands, burning your hands. You're thinking, I'm falling. And anyway, so that was another laugh that we got the dumb football coach, head coach, sliding down the rope. But, I would go back and work on the stack, and it was an enjoyment for me. So I got to learn a lot about A&M from the students. They had what they called the shack. It was a little 5x5 shack, and they had a fire. That's where they stayed. And they were playing cards one night. They had a propane stove. It blew up. They didn't stop. They just kept playing cards. I got up and left, but they didn't. And so I came by one night. There was a little bonfire and a 55-gallon drum and one of the red pots. That's the person in charge. So you go different levels of pots. And he was beating the 55-gallon drum with the accent. Then all of a sudden, he stops, and a kid, which is a junior at Red Pot, that he handpicked, slid down the stack, and had to be, because you're talking about the vertical, he had to have cutting his hands or whatever. He ran over, bent over, and he took 3 slats with the accent, and the 4th slat, well, for the 4th one, he turned to the red pot and says, "Take your best shot." So he hit him the 4th time. The accidental broke. They started all over again. So he took 7 slats. I knew what that felt like, because I had going through egg club initiation years back. I had 2 slats on Saturday morning. I took one, my knees hit the top of the Coke box, and I said, "I ain't taking another one, and there ain't anybody here big enough to make me either." And I was. And our senior came out and said, "You got to take it to get into egg club." So he convinced me to take the last slat. So I knew it, and I said to myself, there's 40,000 students, and if they are that tough, that crazy, I can teach them how to cover kickoffs. And that's how we got started. I told the staff the next morning what I was going to do, and all of them thought I was crazy. RC looked at me and said, "Coach, I think you fell off that stack, didn't you?" But they were good. And the reason for that, before practice, we started with 252, and we'd have 40 for spring practice. And every day before spring practice, or even in the fall before practice, you'd spend 30 minutes of covering open field tackling. Then 30 minutes after practice, you'd spend it covering kickoffs. So they had 1 hour a day doing nothing but covering kickoffs. and open field tackling. So they became really good. It's the same thing if you look in the military and say this group is our special ops. Well, in the special ops, they've got a team, but one team member does one particular thing. And so, but these guys were trained. They that the kickoffs, they were number 1 to number 5. Their average was 12.5. You won't find a major college today with a 12.5 coverage on kickoffs, even today.
It's ridiculous. Yeah. Wow.
Well, the furthest was to the 30-yard line or inside the 30. Bo Jackson had the longest to the 43 in the Cotton Bowl.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, here's another thing that just strikes me as genius because they're technically walk-ons, right? It doesn't affect your scholarship level. The NCAA can't say anything to you. It's just basically you started your own little tradition, and there isn't a student on campus that wouldn't want to be a part of that and how special it is. I can't imagine why other schools aren't doing it, but the fact that they don't makes it even more unique and attributed to you. What a great, not only a marketing idea, but even though your coaches didn't like it, what a great decision to get your students forever involved with the football program in a completely different way. They're hands-on, right? They are invested. This isn't no, this doesn't mean anything. They've got blood in the water in terms of that. That to me is just amazing, Jackie.
Well, the student body, I wish I'd been smart enough to know how important it was to the student body, because they were their classmates, they were their game buddies, date buddies. And, so when the students came to the games, they actually had signs for the players.
Yes.
12-man guys more than they did the players. But, fast forward, again, I wish I'd been smart enough back then to know how important it was. But our players really enjoyed having them because, in spring practice, you had 20 extra guys. And in the fall, 40. And in the fall, we had 20 extra guys. So just think about if you had every team had 40 extra guys in spring practice, that you're not having to wear out your better players going against each other. So it had a drastic impact on our football team. It helped in a lot of different ways, not only from practice, but helping save injuries and helping our team build into championship teams.
Now, let's be candid. The nerd kid who can't run, he's not going to do that. But a lot of these guys, maybe they were very good, but not great high school players. Did you notice the resumes of a few of them? You know what? There's a reason why they're on the team. They know what they're doing. They're good at it. They want to be here, but they do have some football background. Not every single one, but quite a few of them did.
Well,
Is that right?
Most of them were really good high school players.
Yeah.
And for some reason they were not. But we actually had some kids that were offered scholarships to other places. And they turned them down just to be on the 12-man kickoff team. Now, the first year after the first year, I called 2 of them in my office, and we're going to put them on scholarships.
Oh, boy. Wow.
And the first question they asked was, can we still be on the 12th-man kickoff team? And so they turned down the scholarship just to be on the 12th-man kickoff team.
They were rock stars, right, Jackie? You made rock stars out of them, and they didn't want to be on the team. They wanted to be the rock star on just the kickoff coverage. That is hilarious.
Yeah. Well,
go ahead.
2 years, I think it was either last year or the year before, at the end of the year, they actually had, it was 2 years ago, they actually had a all walk-on team, in not only the players on the sideline, but also the whole stadium erupted because they had a all walk-on 12th-man kickoff team.
Wow.
Mm.
What was the cost to the program? Minimal, right? With the helmets and cleats and whatever game uniforms, but the advantage of what it built in terms of your tightness as a community amongst the students and the alumni, it more than paid for itself. But was there any out of pocket to where either your athletic director, the equipment manager, or the chancellor of the school says, we may want to reconsider this?
No.
Yeah.
You're talking about you spent more, equate today, you probably spend more on the training table for one meal than you would spend, taking care of, the players.
Yeah. Football in its purest form. Amazing. So this just comes to you after you get bloody hands by sliding down the rope at the bonfire.
Yes.
Now, were you on campus when the bonfire, where they had that big accident and they had to stop that tradition?
No, I was at Mississippi State, unfortunately, and that was, tragic, and they made an agreement, the university made an agreement that they would never allow students to build a bonfire on campus again.
Right.
But they have an off-campus bonfire that students that they build every year in Bern.
Okay.
And, that has been going on for a long time, and they have quite a few students that participate.
Yeah, it's an amazing tradition, and we've talked about things that have nothing to do with football. But let's get you 5 and 6 your first year. Then next thing you know, you're winning Southwest Conference championships. A quick turnaround there at A&M too, right?
Yes, we were. It's either, again, the players, but the third year we're okay. If we will go to Arkansas and made that mistake, stayed in the wrong place, agreed to play at 11 o'clock at the back end of the season in Fayetteville, which is not a good place or time to play. But we had one player, Ray Childers. The next week we're playing TCU. If TCU beats us, they go to the conference. They win the conference and go to the Cotton Bowl. And we had one player, Ray Childers, that jumped up in either Wednesday or Thursday meeting and said, "I'm not." And he never opened his mouth, never talked. He said, "I'm not going to let TCU beat me." And he was a one-man wrecking crew. So they were 20-some-odd point favored. We beat them badly. And then the next week we go to Austin, play Texas. Again, they are 20-something point favorite. We beat them 37-12. And that flipped us around because all of a sudden the players believe they can win. That no, you can't give a player that. A player themselves, they understand how to win and they believe they can win. That's usually when a program turns around. And that one player, Ray Childers, turned the program around.
It's amazing. When you know and you're knower, I think is the way it's been put. You mentioned Ray Childers. Vincent, give me some other names from those A&M days that coach would just go, "Oh man, that guy, what a difference maker he was for my lineup."
Well, I know once Coach Sherrill got to Texas A&M, I know that I had left Arkansas. I graduated in May '82, but I know what he had coming in at the running back position. God is my witness. I saw this gentleman play up close and personal. He had the quickest feet, and boy, he made you laugh. He made you cringe. Johnny Hector out of New Iberia, Louisiana. Yeah. Then you had another guy, Thomas Sanders and Ernest Jackson. Yeah. You had 3 NFL backs, Coach Sherrill. Talk about them.
Well, Johnny had the quickest feet. He could jump sideways quick. Hector was from Louisiana, great player, and even had a great pro career. And Thomas Sanders, I remember we go play Houston in Houston, University of Houston, in the Astrodome back then. I ran him 43 times, and I kept saying, "We can't win without you, without you in the game." But anyway, we beat Houston, and then we did. We had some players. If they had won a few more games, I wouldn't have been at College Station.
And one other
And
special.
usually that is.
And one other.
Usually that. Go ahead.
One other special player, and excuse me, Coach Sherrill. I had a guy out in my neighborhood in Memphis that played at Houston named Eric Blunt. He played linebacker. And a player that you signed going out of the door, you didn't really finish coaching him. But he said he was the best offensive tackle he's ever played against. Unfortunately, the gentleman is not in the Hall of Fame because he was the outstanding player for the Miami Dolphins. But talk about the mammoth man out of Dallas, Texas, Richmond Whale.
Well, there's no question that when you saw Richmond in high school, he was a man. Great, but he's one that played defense as well. And we recruited him as a defensive lineman out of Roosevelt in Dallas. And so we moved him to offense, and he became unreal as an offensive player because he had great feet, had great strength, had long arms, and he was a high first-round draft choice, protected Danny for years. But I'm sitting, his dad was a minister, and also he was valedictorian of his class.
Yep.
And even today, when you hear him speak today, you know that he had a great upbringing. Plus, he also was very good in as a scholar. But I'm sitting in his home for the visit, and I remember his mother asked me, "Coach Sherrill, are you a minister?" And I don't say a word. I just keep talking. I didn't answer that question. But Richmond Webb will be, I feel, as a lot of others will be in the Hall of Fame.
And one other player, and I'm going to give it back to Hart. They call him the bad boy at Texas A&M. The one that took the helmet off Andre Ware. Aaron Wallace.
That was John Roper.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, I had Hugh Green and Ricky Jackson, probably two of the best that ever played together. And then I had Richmond Webb and John Roper, which were outstanding. And both of them all four of them had careers. Ricky certainly is a Hall of Famer. But, those two at A&M, Wallace and Roper. Now, Roper probably had 4.3 quickness, but it probably ran a 4.6, 4.7. But Webb at 6.6 could run the 4.5 and actually ran 4.4. Wow. And we were having off-season timing, and he was a freshman. I'm standing there by the timer. He said 4.4. I said, "Run it again." 4.4.
Wow.
Run it again. 4.4. He ran 3 4.4s in a row. And then I walked away smiling because back then 4.4 for a 6'6" defensive end was pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes your job a lot easier when you have something like that going on. My goodness, that's breakaway speed. You're running away from somebody else who's trying to catch you when you're that fast. You've obviously seen that with numerous occasions.
Well, Rod Harris, they're seeing Rod Harris, receiver for us, and Aaron Wallace was actually on the other side, defensive end. He came all the way across and caught Aaron down the field like 20 yards. And I said, "We have Rod Harris. We need this guy."
Jackie, where do you think that A&M ranked in those days in terms of recruiting just in the state? I would imagine Austin is number one, and then the guys to the north, right? Oklahoma would poach quite a bit. Everybody would come there, but were you three? And was there a way that you could move up to two? You know what I mean, and get the pick some of those prime targets that you would want to get just from the state? There's so many kids that you don't have to leave the state in order to recruit.
Well, at the end of tenure here, we probably were the top. We'd fight Texas. So you'd have A&M, Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. Arkansas used to come into the state of Texas.
Yeah, you're right. Absolutely right. And then Baylor, Tech, you've got.
You had a circle of almost 250 players. If you take the city of Houston and around, you have almost 250 players a year that sign scholarships somewhere.
Yeah. So was Houston, or would you say Waco, go into Dallas, of course? You've got San Antonio, San Marcos, Austin itself. Back in those days, like I said, you didn't have to travel all that far just to get your entire roster, but you obviously would go to Florida. If there's a kid out in Louisiana, California every now and then, right?
Yeah. Players are everywhere. And, the teams presently today, and Nick probably was the one that really put it in present day time, where he went all over the nation to recruit, but A&M still does. Their teams, the top teams, are going to have players from all over the country because, today your recruiting arm goes everywhere because you're on TV so much. So people in Northeast or California or anywhere, you're able to see the top teams on television all the time.
Yeah, it's an amazing process that is always changing. Got to bring up a little, maybe this is upsetting to you, but in the recruiting process, this is part of it. You get a knock on the door and it's the NCAA. Talk a little bit about, that and, some of the issues we've talked off the air before about, our lack thereof, really, of the NCAA and all the things.
I have to preference this. Anything I say is my opinion.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Now, if you're an attorney, you understand what I'm saying.
Yes.
So, we're in the situation we're in college football because of the NCAA or the lack of it. And unfortunately, everybody is getting penalized today. And because I'm not talking about penalized, I'm talking about how hard it is and all the disruptions in college football, especially, college sports, period, but college football because of the transfer portal. As we know, the transfer portal, Tom Mars out of Little Rock, Arkansas, was the person that actually started that because he went against the NCAA with players and never lost a case. So the NCAA hired Tom Mars. Now, he's no longer working for the NCAA, but he's still representing players. And that's the transfer portal. Now you go, same thing with NIL. That started in California with the O'Bannon case. And when it appealed all the way up to the Supreme Court, when you have 9 judges vote 9-0, you're not going to reverse that because first big case against the NCAA was years ago. There was a track star out of Kansas, and I want to say it was 1960s, that the BEOG, that was the basic economic Opportunity Grant. Now it's called the Pell Grant. That the students that were on the PEOG could not get their entire allotment from the government that they were entitled to. He sued them, and that was one of the first major suits. And then fast forward, when you have the old Banning case that went all the way to the Supreme Court on name, image, and likeness. But before then, the NCAA controlled college football television.
Yep.
And they also controlled T-shirts, the hats. And if you go to a Final Four, so people bought the items off the NCAA website.
Yeah.
And so Oklahoma and Georgia sued the NCAA on proprietary rights because they controlled, at that time, the television. They won the suit, Oklahoma and Georgia. And that changed the complexity where television, money goes back to the universities or to the conference and then to the universities. And so it's been going on for a long time. And there are a lot of things, but in my case, I've had a lot of knocks at the door, but I have never been found guilty of a major violation. Now, was I the head coach? Yeah. If you're the head coach, you're responsible.
Yep.
But the issue that we have today is right now, unless we have a change, in which I think we will have a change, that we'll go to some type of pro model where you'll have two, either east, west, north, south. You'll have two divisions in each, and then they all have it just like you have in the NFL. You'll play against each other to go to a championship game. And at that time, the television rights will be enormous. We do know that it's moving, that the players themselves, meaning, will get a portion of that television, either 20 or 22%, which they feel will be 20 to 22 million that will be to the players. Now, and the difference, every university will have to hire people to make sure they control the NIL, because, and still the teams in large major markets like LA or New York or Chicago will have the advantage, because what a player does an ad for in LA is not the same as they would be paid for an ad in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Right.
So they'll have to add more compliance people to make sure that every one of those players that are doing ads or doing NILs, they comply to whatever bylaws they have. And they're all being, you can't say being paid equal, because that's been the same for years. That's when they did away with, the NCAA did away with cafeterias in dormitories, or dormitories, period, for the players. You had to have 51% that were normal students, and you could only provide one meal a day. Well, tell me where a 300-pounder could have breakfast for $3. And
Yes.
the way that they had this is whatever the university meal plan was, but every university budgets on that, because they feel the students are gone Friday night, 3 meals Saturday, and 2 meals Sunday, may come back Sunday night. So they add those cost of those meals in there, meaning, but they're not providing them. So they cut the cost down of of the meal plans. But when they first enacted that at Mississippi State, it was $3 for breakfast, $5 for lunch, $7 for dinner. So there's not anywhere that you actually could feed the players. And it fast forward, it wasn't until at the Final Four that a player on national television said, I don't have food. I don't have money for food. Then all of a sudden, within 2 days, they got what we now in college football, you're able to have nutrition centers. You're able to, players can have whatever they want when they walk in the locker room or walk out. So, the lack of the NCAA is responsible for where college sports is today, and they have to take that responsibility.
Yeah, it's amazing. And again, this is all your opinion. We're making sure that we say and do the right things from a critiquing standpoint, because these are some of the things that happened to you directly and how it has affected the game. I've said on a couple of occasions where bang, the starter on the track is going, go, start running. And then they run a lap and they go, well, how far do we run? We don't know. We'll tell you later. But for right now, just keep running. The rules and the change of the rules and the enforcement and governing of those rules, sometimes it just looks like it's a giant cluster as opposed to a well-organized machine that is designed to allow fairness, but yet competitive excellence to take the lead. But that's my opinion. But Jackie, you were involved with obviously the last part of your A&M tenure there. The NCAA gets involved with everything that you're doing, and then you're out for 2 years before you coach again. Was that the best time of your life to relax, or was that every day I'm chewing away and I'm going to kick the dog if I don't get a job?
No, you were doing other things.
Yep.
I ended up buying into a car dealership and doing some other things, but I don't know why, but coaching players was probably the best thing I did.
And you rebounded. Talk a little bit about, you spent as much time there as anywhere, Mississippi State, and there's not a whole lot in Starkville. I know Vincent's from, his family's from Mississippi, but I know that my experience there is, why are there so many cars on the side of the road that are on cinder blocks? I didn't understand it, but it needed your help in particular, and you were able to take your talents to Starkville.
Well, the same thing. You had some players, and when I walked into a program, I wanted from the players themselves. And I remember that I would always do this, ask them what they did, the best thing they did, or what they did well.
All right.
And A&M, in the first meeting when I asked that, it wasn't any hesitation. The best thing we did was punt and kickoff returns. Well, we had a little guy that led the nation in punt and kickoff returns. So, yeah, and we all remember the good things. The bad things, I don't know if we either block it out or whatever, but that's what I built Mississippi State, starting that we would certainly, and we won a lot of games in the kicking game. But, when they had players. They just didn't win enough games. And basically that comes back to the players themselves understanding that how to win and that they could win. And so that's turning that around. But again, it's going back to recruiting. And, you had the advantage in Mississippi because you had great junior college players in the state. And back then you had the Prop 48. So you still had to make certain on your test scores, and they had a combination of your grade point average and your test score, but you had to score a minimum on your test score. And we were able to use the junior colleges to be able to build the football team. And, we, at one time, I think for a 5-year period, Florida and Tennessee had won one more game than we had for a 5-year period. We beat Alabama and Auburn 3 or 4 years in a row. And so we had an opportunity to have a good football team. Went to the playoffs, played Tennessee. Tennessee won the national championship that year.
Yeah, there are some, just from a competitive standpoint, LSU, you mentioned Auburn and Alabama. Ole Miss itself, that's obviously one of the great games at the end of the Egg Bowl at the end of every year. But you throw in Arkansas, what a tough division. I mean, you get through that. But Mississippi State, before you got there, they hadn't won more than half of their SEC games in over a decade, and you come, and then now they're competitive again. And that's the great thing about, your overall record, 75-75, but you know what, you kind of change the culture and the mindset. We can take on these guys. We may not beat them every time, but we're going to fight them like dogs, and we're going to come back. That's the part that I take from your time, 14 years there at
13.
13.
Yeah.
And you got to change this culture, and that was not an easy thing to do, especially on Saturdays when you're going against the competition that I just mentioned.
Well, usually when you're taking over a place, not only are you trying to get the players that understand how to win, but also that can win and build your team, but everything outside that stadium, because, there's 7 things that it takes. You got to have the administration, which gives you the tools to win. You have to have the former students, which provide the money to have the facilities, the students. You have to have the players. You have to have the coaches. And you also have to have the media. And the media is so important, but today it's probably more important because the media today is on your phone, your social media. So the players have more pressure on them today as a player than ever before, because things are being said back and forth. You have the chat rooms, and you can look up where tons of people are on the chat room every day talking about what a team did wrong, what a player did wrong, on and on. And don't tell me that doesn't affect the player or the team, and it does.
Yeah, it almost as you see with the portal, day by day, someone may go, that's it, I'm done. Coach yelled at me. Tell that to Bear Bryant. Right? Of course he yelled at me. That's part of how I became a champion, right? But it's different mindset, obviously. What were some of your great challenges that you were able to overcome? I know big games, beating Texas, obviously, and some other things like that. But you mentioned the culture and having the administration. Was that a tough decision to get them to financially and with their vote of a yes to commit to you in a different way than they had with previous coaches?
That's because you won. When you win, naturally they feel it because the money comes in when you win. But, everywhere I went as a coach, and I'm not saying I'm smarter than anybody else, but some of the things I did differently, it's always got the faculty involved. When I was at Pittsburgh, I had a faculty committee, and when we would have a borderline student, they would be the ones that would say yes or no. They would be at the recruiting meetings. They would visit with the prospect, but also they would evaluate their transcripts. And I can say everyone that they voted yes on got their degree. And same thing with Texas A&M. So the faculty is a lot more important than what people understand, because the faculty certainly and will not accept if they feel that you are abusing the players academically. And so, again, I had the faculty as part of our team, where they actually would meet with the players. They would also discuss and they would be in charge of the borderline students, whether they got accepted or not. I didn't make that choice.
Yeah, there's a tremendous relationship where the faculty feels like they need to be a part of it, and for you to massage that, that's not easy. That's high school, college. That's at any level that you look at. Vincent, please go ahead. I know you've got a few questions.
With the players that you recruited at Mississippi State, I had a pleasure as you work at this gymnasium to run and shoot. And it was 3 players I talked to that played in Mississippi State at the time back in 1998. And all of them spoke highly of you, Coach Sherrill. I had to keep that as a quiet kind of my trump card. Greg Favors talked highly of you. Randy Thomas talked highly of you. Robert Hicks talked highly of you. And our all-SEC performer, John James, talked highly of you. And then most of all, my final, I got 2 questions. I'm going to leave it at this and leave you alone today. What was it like coaching Eric Moles? And then, hey, man, tell us really here. And my nephews and uncles want to know this. What was it with you and Coach Tommy West at the University of Memphis when y'all had that altercation at the middle of the field?
Yeah, being from Memphis, you understand that. Yeah, well, coaching all those players, Randy Thomas was a great player, but the NFL, as you know, used the Wonderlic test, and Randy didn't score very high. And so his draft status dropped. But he went in and started as a rookie offensive lineman. So, y'all tell me how many offensive linemen that starts as rookie that they're not intelligent. That doesn't equate. Yep. But he came in and started as a rookie, and he had a great career. Eric Moles was a man playing with kids. And today he actually trains kids today, younger. But I remember we'd go to practice, and we had a telephone that was kind of an emergency phone, and he'd be acting like he was on the phone, and I'd just laugh at him, get to practice, Of course, I said couple of other things to him, but anyway, I'm gone for one practice on a Monday, and he goes out and he actually orders pizza to the practice field.
No, he didn't.
No way.
And some of the assistant coaches went crazy, and of course, and then his first practice in Buffalo, they ordered pizzas for the whole team and gave him the tab.
I love it. That's great. Oh my gosh.
And Tommy, Jolie Dunn worked for me. He worked for Mississippi. I hired him out of Mississippi. And
excellent defensive coordinator. Excellent.
Great schemer now. He could tell you what you did 5 years ago. But he could scheme you. He could get one person free, always on a blitz. But coaching football, especially offense or defense, it's called technique and fundamentals. But he was a schemer, not a technique coach, but great coach. And he went to Memphis to work for Tommy. And they're around going and talking to alumni. Tommy kept saying, "I've circled this game." So that basically was the comment after the game. tell Joe Lee I'm glad he circled this game.
Yeah, I remember that Mississippi State won like 27-10. Y'all put a beating on Memphis that day.
Yeah, and Tommy basically said, "You can tell him yourself." That's basically what he said.
Oh, good stuff. Good stuff.
Jackie, you mentioned something that was kind of interesting. I met him once, 10, 15, 20 years after I went through my draft class. But it's just very interesting when you get to meet people that have, whether it be a photographic memory or something like that. But Gil Brandt, I met him at the Falcons camp. Hi, Gil. I wanted to say hello to you. My name is Harper LaBelle. He goes, Colorado State, right? Immediately, he just knew. And blah, blah, blah. And he played, good to see you. How are you? We'd never met before. But somehow or another, in all of this data that people gather, they're able to recall instantly and bring to mind something that it could be of importance. Did you have any of those assistant coaches that work for you that, man, this is the greatest thing I ever had happen, because this guy can remember everything that I can't, and he's just such a great impact, not only for what I need to do, but for the game itself. And we mentioned Jolie Dunn. I mean, just guys that you associate with. Could you give a couple to our audience that we would never think of, but man, these guys are special, they're important, and they're vital to my coaching staff?
Well, Jimmy was probably the smartest.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Jimmy, which played at Arkansas, but he made his money playing gin or playing cards at the student union every day. And you couldn't.
That's how he earned his NIL money, but taking it off of some of the other guys in the card table.
Jimmy could play cards now. Great mind, very intelligent, but he was one that had a great memory of what to do, how to in past games. But you had quite a few of them that did remember. But Joe Lee probably had a great memory, because he could tell you what a team did 5 years ago.
Yeah, right.
And so, coaching is repetitive, and you repeat, all the stories of Coach Lombardi back when he was coaching. But if you take Coach Lombardi, that he would run one play over and over and over.
Yeah.
And I did that a couple of practices where we ran, and I got it basically from Oklahoma, that when they had the great teams, they would run the play over and over and over until they got it exactly right.
I've heard that, I know this for a fact, that George Pugh, who was recruited at Alabama, hey, Coach, Tennessee's interested in me, and they said that I don't have to practice on Tuesday or Wednesday. How long do you practice? And Bear says, son, at the University of Alabama, we practice till we get it right. And that's just one answer that I thought was absolutely fantastic. And real quick, Vince Lombardi once was at a lecture. Bunch of these other coaches, they broke for lunch, and when they had come back, he was still doing it. 8 hours later, he was still talking about 27G. One play, 8 hours he talked about it. So obviously he went over every nuance that you possibly could. Maybe that's a little long, but I hope you never talked about one play for 7 hours and 58 minutes.
Well, I did it one time. We ran the same play over and over for about an hour.
Okay.
Make sure that it implanted in the player's mind.
Yes. Did you have the whistle? And were you Herb Brooks in the movie Miracle? Again, just do it again and do it right. Right?
Well, we did a lot of things over. Yes.
Yeah, we get it right. Hey, do you mind me asking? I didn't see it live, but when Jimmy was inducted in the Hall of Fame, and when Dave Baker walks out on that studio, and Bradshaw starts going, "Hey, hey," he knew what was going on. Jimmy had no idea.
No.
And the tears of joy that he had. What a humbling and great moment for you to be a part of Jimmy's career and helping get that thing started. What he was able to do at Miami and obviously with the Cowboys at the professional level. What did that mean to you?
Well, you're very, very happy, but when you put yourself in those guys, until you're there, certainly I'm not going to be in the Pro Hall of Fame, but I was fortunate to be in quite a few Hall of Fames until you put yourself in there. And Jimmy, not being a player in professional ball, but he's in the College Football Hall of Fame, he's in the Pro, and to be recognized. And when you look at all the coaches, there's not that many coaches in the NFL Hall of Fame. So the honor was really, overbearing to him. But, I have to say that of all the coaches, Jimmy probably that I've been around, Jimmy probably was the smartest. And I think all the players will tell you that, and all his assistant coaches.
Yeah, he certainly was able to put great success together. And again, part of your coaching tree. We want to wrap this up with all the respect. You obviously, what a great contribution you've been to college football and everything. But now you're helping players. Talk a little bit about what it is that you are wrapping your fingers and hands around that's important to you. It keeps you going, and you get to assist in other people either recovering or getting better from situations that they're in right now from a health perspective. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I got involved in a company called Celltex Therapeutics. It's a stem cell company that actually does adipose that take 20 cc's to 2 little fingers of adipose fat tissue and spin it down, and you'll have 3 to 5% of pure MSCs, mesenchymal stem cells. The scientists will say mesenchymal, and the company puts it in a petri dish and grows it out, washes, that's P1 basically, and then they go to wash everything out, put it in another, it goes to P2. Then they have what they call a master bank, which was 7 vials, and each vial produces like 200 million. So you have 1.4 billion stem cells stored for life. And then when they do therapy, and how I got started, I had a rotator cuff in my right shoulder, had it repaired surgically, tore my left, and did stem cells. It's stronger than my right. I got to go back and repair the right one again. But I asked the CEO, which was at that time David Eller, Anita Perry is today, the Governor Perry's wife, and if I could take some former NFL players that I played with or coached against, and to do stem cell therapy with. Now I'm talking about ALS, autoimmune polymyalgia, also all the joints, shoulders, knees, backs, and hips, and they all, and even Parkinson's, they all improved, and they ended up with more quality of life than what they would have. And, from Tony Dorsett, from, dementia, Bob Lilly, Leroy Jordan, Steve Bowman, that I played with at Alabama. So, today, the future of medicine really is in the regenerative or stem cell therapy. And Dr. Stedman in Vail, Colorado. He was the first, I understand, that did PRP, that's platelet-rich plasma, that a lot of orthopedics are using. But most orthopedics today, surgeons or doctors, are using stem cell therapy instead of surgery.
Yeah, Stedman was renowned for being the knee guy, right? You got Dr. Andrews in Birmingham as another, these great guys that are doing everything they can to help guys back out on the field. You mentioned some of the players that you were teammates with or that you've known, coached, etc. What about the players or people in general that don't have a tight relationship with you but are very interested nonetheless about getting their life a little bit better? Is there a website or is there a place to direct them?
Celltex, Celltex Therapeutics, or they can go to celltexbank.com and go to the website. It gives you all the information on, and then it gives you the information if you want to call and ask. It has all different types of videos of other issues and that you can look at. And it also gives you the process from starting to bank. And everybody, all young people, should have their stem cells banked, because your stem cells are the age and will always be the age that you bank it. If you bank it at 20 and need them at 50, then they're 20 years old, your own. And they are your own stem cells, which means they came out of your body. And they're put in a cryopreserved, minus 300 degrees. And, there's, again, today, the medicine that we have is going to regenerative, and stem cells is one of the largest.
When you were going to school in the 60s, this technically didn't exist, right? And then when you're coaching the 70s and 80s, there are people that are just experimenting with it. Do you think that we're still in the bottom of the first inning in terms of the amount of technology that we're about to learn? Because there's so much yet to know. But we do know enough to where, it's a great idea if you were to get your own stem cells and let's go cryogenically store them for yourself. Obviously, the technology is building off of itself and creating these amazing answers to questions that we didn't have answers to just a short time ago.
Yeah, the research, but anybody can look up Celltex Therapeutics, but you can type in stem cell therapy and it'll give you a lot of companies around the country. But if you go to clinical trials, that's with an S, clinicaltrials.gov, whatever issue you have, you can go clinicaltrials.gov/whatever issue in stem cell therapy. It will give you all the clinical trials around the world in the ones that have been completed. It will give you the answers of what their conclusion is. And you'll be amazed of how much, Kobe Bryant, we can go Peyton Manning. Peyton went, I want to say, to Switzerland or Germany, and Kobe went with the Achilles tear, went to Switzerland or Germany. And both of them came back within a very short period of time. And as we know, Peyton ended up having a great career at the end of his career.
Yeah.
So Denver.
He was technically one doctor's decision away from never playing again because of the neck injury that he had.
Yes. And that's probably why he was cut from Indianapolis.
Yeah.
They didn't want to take the risk.
Vincent, final thoughts?
Honor, blessing, greatness. What more can we say today here on 100 Yards of Football? One of the greatest coaches ever been on this show. I'm always going to cherish this. Like the great Sade, cherish the day. Back to you, Hart.
Well, Jackie, we appreciate your time. You've been very, very gracious with it. And thank you, especially there at the very end about other causes and things that you're involved with now. It's amazing world, isn't it? And you get to still be a part of it. Hear that you're not blowing the whistle anymore, but you're doing everything that you can to assist others.
Thank you. And I appreciate Vince. Thank you. And certainly Harper, thank you. In a number of times, but you got in on there and didn't let me out.
We're guilty as charged, and
Yeah.
fantastic though. Thank you. We know that there were so many areas of your life and what you've touched, the universities, the players, and everything that have been a part of what you were able to build. And the NCAA is a better place because of it. At least not the institution of the NCAA, but the football fields, the universities, and obviously the practice facilities where you've been involved with. You've produced winners everywhere you've been. So thank you so much, Jackie. We appreciate it. And we want to say thank you to everybody who stuck around for the show today. Our job was to bring you the great, the immortal, the wonderfully spoken Jackie Sherrill. We wanted to make sure that we had a chance to visit with him and go over some of the particulars that we weren't able to in that first interview. But we thank him, and especially for his patience with us. We are greatly appreciative. So for Logan Landers, for Vincent Turner, for Jackie Sherrill, I'm Harper LaBelle saying thank you for tuning in, everybody. This has been a special edition of 100 Yards of Football, and we were glad that you were able to be a part of it. Have a fantastic rest of your day.